Weapon balancing is like aerodynamics. Looks pretty simple to understand at first, but then you go deeper and you're like, oh wait, this shit's actually kind of complicated. You got so many different factors in how a weapon works that need to be taken note of, and because of that, very few games actually get it right the first try, or really at all.
Oh my god, bro. Oh, hell no, man. What the fuck, man?
And Fortnite is no exception to this. I mean, look at how many weapons have popped up over the past several years. Some are definitely bound to be more unfair than others. 95 headshot, holy shit. You are missing out with this thing, man. But even within these bumps and potholes in the road, you're gonna notice a pattern. And that pattern is scoped assault rifles, aka red dots. These kinds of weapons have had their earliest roots in Chapter 1, but then Chapter 3 opened the floodgates. And ever since then, they've demolished every single loophole they've appeared in. And they've demolished a lot of loopholes.
What is this game, mate? What is it?
You should have stayed out of his box, you dumb motherfucker. So like, just what the hell is going on with all these red dots just pissing all over the Fortnite sandbox? They're not just pissing on it, they're also pooping on it, then pouring gas all over it, then lighting it on fire. So like, why the fuck is Epic still toying around with that shit? It's like running with scissors at this point, isn't it?
Did I ever tell you what the definition of insanity is? Insanity is doing the exact same fucking thing over and over again, expecting shit to change. That is crazy.
Well, we need to go back to the beginning.
Before time began, there was the cube.
Scoped assault rifles have been around since the beginning of time. It all started with the very first scoped assault rifle that was introduced in the pre-season, which makes it older than our primate ancestors. What the what is this accuracy? While the second take, the thermal scoped assault rifle, was introduced in Season 4. The gist of both these weapons was that they were more capable at long range compared to other assault rifles. Not as capable as snipers, but they're easy to use since they were hit scan, and you also didn't have to spend half your life reloading it as opposed to actually firing it. It's kind of like how DMRs are positioned now in the modern meta, except DMRs are also projectiles, just like the snipers. You look at them now, and both the regular and thermal scoped assault rifles would be really shit by today's standards. They're really slow and they don't do a lot of damage in return to make up for that. Even back then, some people already thought they were shit.
I don't consider it the craziest thing in the world,
but they still got the job done in the more primitive and still maturing sandboxes of early Chapter 1. Remember, these were the first scoped assault rifles. There was no precedent back then on how good these weapons needed to be or how they should handle, because we were still learning how to use fire back then. Now fast forward to Chapter 3, when the dam burst and everything changed. Introducing the first ever red dot assault rifle, the MK7, courtesy of the 7. Damn this pesky 7. So the red dot was essentially just a glorified scope because it looked a bit different from previous scopes, but it achieves the exact same result of you can see farther. But then you add to that an insane fire rate and really steady handling, and you've got what was once, and arguably still is, one of the single most bananas weapons in the entire game's history. And it wasn't alone. Because ever since the MK7 first hit the scene, we've seen a pretty tangible flow of new red dots following in its footsteps, like monkey see, monkey do. And just like their forefather, most of them have really infested the seasons they've appeared in too. The Striker Burst Rifle and a reworked thermoscoped assault rifle in Resistance, the Red Eye Assault Rifle in Chapter 4 Season 1, the MK Alpha in Wilds, which is just a modified MK7, the Twin Mag Assault Rifle in Last Resort, which I'd argue is just as broken as the MK7 itself, and most recently, the Holder Twister Assault Rifle and the A280 CFE Blaster Rifle in the first few seasons of Chapter 6. Now, why are all these red dots such a tyrannid plague on the game? I mean, you get beamed by them really easily, it's easy to see that, but we need to get into the microscopic details on this. So there's this thing we like to call power creep, which refers to older weapons being rendered obsolete by newer, more powerful ones. I guess some people would say this is what's happened with these red dots, but I don't think that was Epic's entire idea behind them. The MK7 and every other red dot that's come after wasn't made explicitly to push out the classic assault rifles from before. Instead, they were more intended for the niche once occupied by the scoped assault rifle. In fact, I'm sure there are some classic weapons from back then that could definitely compete with red dot today. But what's really happened here is just straight out of Jurassic Park. These red dots are not just excelling in their intended niche, they're also invalidating other weapons and other niches that exist alongside them. This comes down to a lack of counterplay, which refers to weapons having viable counterparts or notable drawbacks in the meta so that no singular weapons just become so dominant. Because without a red dot, in order to laser someone, you usually need to burst or tap fire them, or you need a bit of luck. Most times it usually takes a bit of skill. But when you do have a red dot, it's just way too fucking easy to laser someone quicker than they can say, "Oh shit!" without needing any skill. And also, just think about the people who have been lasered, and the times you yourself have been lasered. That's no fun! This mother...
Adam. Remember what I...
There's just no real reason to take an assault rifle that doesn't have a red dot over a rifle that does have one.
Well, hang on, you've just...
No, I like it. This is brilliant. But I like this.
So what this does is, it discourages player choice and weapon variety, because when you're dropping prestige 24 karat versions of other weapons, for even just a green piece of shit holo twister to win the game, it's not exactly riveting gameplay. What's worse is that if these things stay in for more than one season at a time, playing Call of Duty 12-year-old aim assist simulator not only gets stale really fast, it can also leave something of a cultural zeitgeist that gaslights people into thinking that they are the meta, regardless of what weapon it actually is. For example, when the A2A CFE blaster rifle came to the game after 6 straight months of broken red dots dominating the sandbox, many people automatically perceived it as the alpha male despite actually not being as powerful as the other weapons for a change. We'll get into that later. However, there are reasons why these red dots are so popular and why Epic keeps bringing them back. First of all, most of them are really satisfying to use. No one likes to deal with bloom, you know. Plus, I remember we were all parading the MK7 when that first came out. The feeling of laser beaming someone with that thing back then, that was bliss. Second, as I mentioned earlier, there is meant to fill that role of longer range engagement relative to other assault rifles, and the scope is supposed to help with that. Not quite sniper or even DMR range, but a niche below that, while still being easier to use than those other two, even if not as effective in theory. But what happens in practice is these rifles just become an objective upgrade of it just being naked. Because in most cases, the red dot just doesn't have any downsides. It's actually just training wheels, and it does everything the naked rifle does but better, even if the naked rifle itself is good. And to that end, they're not usually much worse at close range compared to their naked brethren, especially after Chapter 6 introduced cantering. That's a pretty big balancing problem because scoped weapons are usually supposed to be borderline unusable at close range. That's just how gun balancing has worked since the Industrial Revolution. However, there have been a few seasons that have banished red dots to the Shadow Realm and opted for loopholes without them, so they instead unload the long range roller to other weapons. But the results of this can vary depending on how those other weapons feel and perform, and we've already seen both sides of this. Paradise was the first season since Chapter 3 Season 1 not to feature any red dots. However, this was during a time when red dots were still a cool new novelty and we were all like, oh my god, red dots are so cool, I want to keep using them. So not having any red dots this early on wasn't a great idea. Instead, all you really had was the Cobra DMI, which was just a shitty infantry rifle. And the assault rifles here weren't really built for long range. Chapter 6 Season 3 Super was the next season not to feature any red dots. But the assault rifles it did have, the Fury and the Spar, I think those are both pretty good. And the Deadeye DMR, the only long range weapon, I thought that was pretty decent too. The next season, Shock and Awesome continued this trend, keeping both the Fury and the Deadeye DMR, but also unfolding the Hammer and introducing the all-new OXR rifle, which is probably the most competent of the 3 ARs at long range for the season, and it's alright. Timing is also an important context here because unlike Paradise, both Super and Shock and Awesome came after half an entire year of the Holo Twister just going explosive diarrhea all over the game sandbox like a 12 gauge shotgun and completely flipping people's perception toward red dots like it's opposite day. We used to think they were cool, now we're just getting Vietnam flashbacks and we just want to have the game. Paradise's context was the opposite. But also, unlike Paradise, both Super and Shock and Awesome made up for their red dot deficiency with generally good weapons optimized for long range. And what you end up with is a loot pool that felt so much more balanced and fairer, because this time around, your choice on what weapons was best for long range or anything was mainly subjective, compared to a loot pool that relied on the red dot as a crutch for its meta, like a full-blown wheelchair. I'm looking at you, Last Resort.
That's so stupid.
Remember how I said earlier that red dots were also invalidating other weapons in the loot pool? Well, it's important to talk about those other weapons too, especially other assault rifles that don't have scopes, which make up the majority of this casualty list. The Ranger AR in the first 2 seasons of Chapter 3, the OG Scar in Chapter 4 Season 1, the Havoc Suppressed Assault Rifle and the Flapjack Rifle in Chapter 4, the DMR class in general, the Fury Assault Rifle in Chapter 6 Season 1, the Collateral Damage Assault Rifle in Chapter 6 Season 2, and the DLT-19, the DC-15, and the IQA-11 in Galactic Battle. Now, these weapons don't really have much in common with each other, aside from most of them just being smeared across the world by red dots they coexisted with. Not just smeared, they were wiped all over the floor, and that floor was covered in piss. But this very nature is important for us if we want to take key lessons away from these weapons, you know, to help with balancing the red dots, so that we can have them in the game without them being broken. First of all, the weapons need to actually feel good and be good. And this is something Fortnite has only started getting the hang of recently. The Ranger Assault Rifle was, and still is, just hot garbage. This thing just felt super unsatisfying and unresponsive to use, and even the few seasons in Chapter 3 where it wasn't getting neck stopped by the MK7, the Hammer AR was doing that instead. The Havoc Suppressed Assault Rifle in Chapter 4 barely did damage and was just outperformed by the Flapjack in Season 3. The Fury Assault Rifle and the Collateral Damage Assault Rifle in Chapter 6 were both very viable weapons in their own right, but they just still couldn't stand up to the Holo Twister. But as we've seen in Super and Shock and Awesome, these rifles can shine in a better environment if they're viable and they feel nice to use. You put the Ranger and the Havoc Suppressed against the Fury and the Collateral Damage, I'm sure the Fury and the Collateral Damage will clear 9 times out of 10. Secondly, the degree of impact a red dot can have on a loot pool actually kind of depends on how powerful that red dot itself is, because not all of them are built equal. The MK7 and the Holo Twister's reigns of terror have both been very well documented, both guns being so strong that nothing could stand up to them.
Go fuck yourself!
The Red Eye Assault Rifle in Chapter 4, meanwhile, was a rare example of an actually balanced red dot, but it was just surrounded by shitty weapons that allowed it to dominate its own space, not the entire loot pool. Emphasis on its own space. The A280 CFE in Galactic Battle, though, was never given this luxury. The DC-15 and the DLT-19 were more than capable of matching the A280 CFE in combat, despite neither of them having scopes or public perception. And I've even mentioned the IQA-11 yet. Speaking of which, let's look at the DMRs. The Marksman Rifle class's struggles to fit in with the Fortnite gameplay loop is Fortnite's most poorly kept secret. The thermal tactical DMRs were the unluckiest victims in particular. Both of them were just completely shit on by red dots in back-to-back seasons. The thermal DMR, however, was dog shit, dealing less damage than some hit-scan weapons, and no big increase in fire rate can make up for that. The tactical DMR was a more solid weapon. It was a step up from the thermal, but it still had no chance against a red dot as broken as a twin mag. The IQA-11 Marksman Blaster Rifle holds the rare distinction of an underdog that managed to beat its bully and completely flip the script. Part of this comes down to the A280 CFE blaster rifle not really being broken, but also down to the IQA-11 itself being broken instead. Say what you will about the IQA-11's rampage in Galactic Battle, or Galactic Battle in general, but it showed us a way for DMRs to cement themselves in Fortnite's gameplay, and it would immediately be followed up with the Deadeye DMR, which, while not as powerful as the IQA-11, was still a pretty good weapon, but it hasn't had to deal with any red dots itself, so moving on. So when we look at all these unfortunate weapons, there are clear takeaways we can learn from if we want to create harmony between the haves and the have-nots. The have-nots need to actually be good weapons, whether next to a red dot or not. The viability of the red dots themselves also matters, and DMRs now have a clear direction to actually be good and not just constantly brutalizing every season they pop their heads in. But before we discuss this further, I want to take a quick trip into the back rooms quickly and discuss a topic I've mostly avoided up until now. No. Now, I've not brought up Chapter 5 until now because the way that chapter handled red dots couldn't be more different from the rest of the game, which is Chapter 5 in a nutshell. But with weapon modding being the main big gimmick, you could throw a red dot onto anything. Another big thing was that every single weapon was also projectile, including assault rifles. This one single change, for the catastrophe it brought to a game designed with hit scan in mind, was an important countermeasure to make red dot assault rifles, which are everywhere, thanks to modding by the way, much more balanced in chapter 5 than in any other chapter before or since. Sure, there were a few instances where slapping a red dot onto a certain assault rifle was the Giga Chad move, like we saw with the Striker AR and the Striker Burst, but red dots in chapter 5 generally had a higher skill ceiling and were more forgiving towards anyone calling the route because you had to lead your shots now. No, you don't have to do that anymore, we're out of chapter 5 now. So when it comes to balancing red dot assault rifles and bringing them in line with other weapons, there are a few avenues I think Fortnite can take here. Let's look at the red eye and the A280 CFE, which I've already mentioned as both being pretty sensible red dots compared to their balls to the wall siblings. What do you think both of these guns have in common? Low fire and damage. The red eye is slower than some semi-auto weapons, while the A280 CFE deals way less damage than most other red dots, despite having similar fire rate. Most importantly though, both of these weapons share the lowest DPS of any red dot, both hanging around the 110 to 140 range across all standard rarities. Instead, they theoretically make up for that with better handling and stability than the faster firing ones. But even then, the faster firing ones still aren't that difficult to control. If you can't control the recoil, then that's just a skill issue. What is difficult though is hip firing the MK7 after it got nerfed mid-season after it was introduced, where without aiming, this thing had comically wide bloom. Like, this shit is wider than a black hole. Difficult is an understatement. This gun effectively became completely unusable up close, so you were forced to use it at distances, so that opened up closer range wells for other weapons. The Striker Burst in chapters 3 and 6 was a strong weapon, but as a burst rifle, which isn't as flexible beyond long range as a full auto, it didn't really overstep its boundaries all that much, nearly as much as the other red dots did. I've seen some people say that red dots should be projectile just like in chapter 5. Theoretically that might make sense, but having two different gameplay philosophies clash like that on the same principle, that would just look weird. It's like if you just took Oddjob and GoldenEye and replaced him with a full-height Spartan. It just wouldn't look or feel right, even if it's theoretically more balanced. What I think would work is red dots would all have Goatsay bloom when hip firing or cantering. Maybe not to the ridiculous extent that they did with the MK7, but bad enough that you'd be better off good old iron instead. In terms of modular weapons, a scope attachment would come at the cost of increasing hipfire and cantering bloom just as astronomically that not even a laser could offset that shit. Also, maybe decrease the damage enough on the fast firing red dots that they do similar DPS to the red eye and the A280 CFE. This would be the counterplay that these red dots have largely lacked for so long, because it would make them less flexible beyond long range and open up close range roles for other weapons. It would make a lot of sense visually too, because when you're cantering with a scope, your character just looks like they're winging it instead of actually aiming like they would with iron sight, so that would explain why the bloom is so bad from a visual standpoint. The twin mag assault rifle I think in particular just shouldn't have a red dot. I imagine even without it, that gun would still be really good. I mean, just look at the twin mag SMG, that thing was based, even without a red dot. Also, complement these weapons with other weapons that are good so that loot pool is as balanced as can be. Remember, back in chapter 3 season 1, it wasn't just the MK7 that was so good, it was also just that the Ranger assault rifle was just terrible. Same with the chapter 4 Scar and the Havoc suppressed AR. But generally good weapons can shine even when placed next to a red dot, like we saw with the Fury and the Blaster rifles. And that, in a nutshell, is Fortnite's red dot problem, and what I think can be done to balance them.
Sometimes my genius is... it's almost frightening.
Because I would want to see these kinds of weapons banished from the game forever. They can be fun to use at times, and most importantly, they add flavor to the game's variety of weapons, but they can also be really difficult to balance. Just like Philip Petit, Fortnite is walking a thin tightrope between these red dots either causing utter chaos and misery for the sandbox, or just being wet fart in the wind like the OG scoped assault rifle of prehistoric times. We will achieve balance one day, it has been reached before. But as of me making this video, we're at a point in history where we just need some time away from those little shits.